Welcome to all of you. My name is Benoît Pylyser. I'm a strategic advisor at the Challenges Forum International Secretariat hosted by the Folke Bernadotte Academy in Stockholm, Sweden. On behalf of the Stockholm Forum, CIPRI, and the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, I welcome you to this open webinar on the regional organizations and political missions. It's my pleasure to present to you our panelists. Dr. Roselyn Akombe, she's the Chief of Policy, Guidance and Learning, Policy and Mediation Division. Borja Palladini Adel, he's a Residence Fellow at the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, leading the Effectiveness of Peace Operations Network, evaluation of the UN Special Political Mission in Colombia. Borja is also a lecturer in peacebuilding practice at a number of Colombian and Spanish universities. And lastly, Gustavo de Carvalho. He's a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, Peace Operations and Peacebuilding Program in Pretoria, South Africa. Welcome to all of you. In terms of program, we will start with a presentation by Borja. Next, we will go into guiding questions to our panelists, which will be followed each time by a Q&A with you, the audience. Please refer to the Q&A link at the bottom of your page in Zoom. We will also run 2 polls. And before closing, we will ask all panelists to very briefly, in 1 minute, recommend some pragmatic next steps in ensuring strategic partnerships and coherence between the UN and regional organizations. I will now give the floor to Sharon Wiharta, who is our Senior Peace Operations Specialist and who will also be chairing this webinar. Sharon, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Benoît, and welcome everyone to this session on regional organizations and political missions across regional learning and fostering peace building. We're thrilled to once again be one of the partners of the annual Stockholm Forum on Peace and Development. This dialogue-driven event resonates strongly with Challenges Forum as it is the core of what we do here at Challenges Forum. We are a global network of 50 partner organizations in 23 countries, representing major troop, police, and financial contributing countries, and the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council. Our partner organizations are multidisciplinary and range from think tanks, practitioners, to policymakers in national ministries and departments. The International Secretariat, which Benoît and I and the rest of the team are part of, is hosted by the Folke Bernadotte Academy, the Swedish Agency for Peace, Security and Development. Challenges Forum convenes an impartial and informal space for dialogue to foster shared understanding, to generate innovative ideas, and to share knowledge and good practices, to contribute to more effective peace operations and multilateral peace operations partnerships. It is in that spirit of sharing experiences that our session today is guided by. We will be learning and discussing regional peace-building practices by political missions, and how we might foster closer strategic and operational partnerships between regional organizations and with the UN. Many of you have indicated what you hope our dialogue will touch on, and these include UN and regional organizations' cooperation in peace building, and how do we and effective involvement of communities and peace building initiatives in mission work plans. How do we more effectively involve communities? We certainly hope to bring these questions and more into our conversation today. You'll have an opportunity at various points during the session to pose questions. We ask you to submit your questions using the Q&A button, as Benoît has already indicated. Please try to be as concise as possible with your questions, and if you could please mention your affiliation. We will also, as mentioned, ask you to respond to 2 or 3 polls to have your views during this discussion. Without further ado, I'm delighted to invite Borja Palladini-Adel to kickstart the discussion.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank the Challenges Forum CIPRI and the Swedish government for inviting me for this interesting panel. To begin, allow me a Swedish-inspired personal anecdote that helped me to prepare my ideas. My older sister, Patricia, has worked in recent years as a globalization specialist for a multinational company. In the last month, however, her title has changed. Now she is a localization specialist. It seems like a radical change, doesn't it? But it's two sides of the same coin, as I learned. She has recently started working as a consultant for IKEA to support IKEA's effort to locate its presence in various countries of the world. I began to investigate what localization means in IKEA's practices, since the words I heard from my sister and from IKEA resonates a lot the new narrative used in peace building and peace operations. IKEA is a global company. Its products require high levels of standardization, both to produce and to sell them. However, to sell the furniture in various countries of the world, you must be very sensitive to the local realities. One of its executives expressed how they carry out this localization strategy. He said that IKEA professionals visit thousands of families at their homes before opening an operation in a new country. They talk to them, understand their tastes, their way of organizing the home, their concerns, their interests and needs. From this conversation, they adjust their local operation. Sounds interesting, doesn't it? Peace operations in general are undergoing a radical change like the one my sister has experienced in her professional life and IKEA as a global company. We have heard the narrative. Through its peace operations, the United Nations must consider local ownership, be more inclusive, put people at the center. Peace operations must develop capacities for dialogue. They have to do context and conflict analysis, develop joint conflict and drivers of peace assessments. In my opinion, Colombia is an advanced scenario to understand this new logic. Show for what can be to deepen this localization process. Everyone knows Colombia as a complex case of armed conflict, crossed with drug trafficking and exclusion of important sectors of the population. But Colombia must also be known as an example of building peace from the local level. There are currently two peace operations underway. The first is the mission to support the peace process of the Organization of American States. It has been in Colombia since 2004, supporting the peace policy of various governments. During their first years, they were very questioned because they had to verify that the mobilization of a paramilitary group in a peace process that did not meet international standards. Today, however, they are a respected and relevant actor in the peace process, especially at the local level. The OAS is accompanying the plurality of Colombian actors, not only the government, in the development of peace policies. They are deployed permanently in the areas of the country most affected by the armed conflict. It has developed trust, sustained its presence, gained respect and recognition. Its legitimacy does not come because there is a top-down mandate. It comes because it is accompanying those who need it most, acting as a bridge between the people and local, the national and international decision makers. The United Nations Special Political Mission is playing a similar role. The first political mission during 2017 had a classic unlimited mandate. It verified the ceasefire between the government of Colombia and the FARC and the process to lie down the arms. UN didn't do it alone. They established themselves as a bridge of trust that facilitated cooperation between the government, the security forces, the FARC guerrilla. Hence, these actors could overcome their fears and the lack of confidence of being betrayed by their former enemies. Together, through a tripartite mechanisms based on collaboration, they verified the ceasefire and the disarmament. The process was as important as the outcome. The second UN Special Political Mission had a broader mandate to verify the parties' commitments regarding 2 points of the peace agreement: the reintegration of former FARC members and the implementation of security and protection measures for them and local communities. Currently, they are a highly respected actor in the territories, which adds to the continued UN system presence in Colombia. Both political missions started their peace operations with a more traditional top-down logic, responding to the international mandate. Sorry. But after several years in the country, they have developed a legitimacy at the eyes of the people, which is perhaps more important to understand the relevant position they have achieved. How have they developed this legitimacy at the eyes of the people? I present some working hypotheses. I'm preparing an evaluation within the framework of the Effectiveness of Peace Operations Network, EPON, to test these ideas with a team of practitioners and scholars. First idea, they develop legitimacy from the local level. This emerging legitimacy has not depended only on the mandate, have not depended only on the mandate received, but on the ability to maintain a constant and close presence with communities in remote areas of the country and generate regular dialogue with key actors. Like IKEA, talking to people has been essential. Second, they develop legitimacy because they have built bridges and spaces of trust between local actors and the state institutions, the FARC, and the armed forces. They have learned to listen to the voices of the locals, but they have also become a channel and a platform that other international actors have used to relate and understand local context. Third, they have developed legitimacy because they have been able to develop strategic skills, traditionally misnamed as soft skills, and make effective use of the soft power that can emanate from the international mandates and the blue flag. Even when they do not have a mediation or a facilitation mandate, daily on a small scale, they are facilitating peace processes, which contributes to the peace process in capital letters and give the last more legitimacy. Fourth, inclusion has not been done as a concession to the local actors, but by design. Inclusion by design is the only possible way of working in a context with a society actively realized wants to partake of the peace process. Emerging legitimacy, dialogue and sustained presence, soft power, everyday facilitation and mediation, bridge building and cooperation. These are the best ways for the United Nations to locate their operations and allow legitimacy to emerge at the eyes of their clients. And for that, it is essential to understand, as IKEA did, that it is crucial to talk and listen more as a strategy for building and sustaining peace and reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Borja, for a very enlightening and sharp presentation. I particularly like the analogy with IKEA and the need for talk with local communities or clients in the case of IKEA. Thank you very much for that. At this point, I would like to ask Roselyn or Gustavo if they would like to come in on Borja's presentation. Would you like, do you have any comments or probing question? If not, I propose that we go into the guiding question number 1. Good. So in the spirit of South-South learning, what are some of the good examples in regional peace-building practices by political missions that the African Union and the Organization of American States can learn from each other? And I would like to ask Gustavo to go first. Before, I think we will have a brief poll. If we can have the poll on our screen, please. So we have a question here. With potential social and political turmoil in the wake of COVID-19, how would you rate the importance of conflict prevention and strengthening national ownership to address drivers of peace and conflict? And we ask you to answer within a range of 1 to 10. So please submit your answers. Thank you. Can we see the results, please? So we see that a majority of the respondents have chosen a value of 7 or 8. And actually, sorry, I needed to scroll down. The majority of respondents have replied with the value 10. So 27% of the respondents think that with the potential social and political turmoil in the wake of COVID-19, conflict prevention is more now than ever before important in terms of strengthening national ownership to address the drivers of peace and conflict. Thank you for that. So with that, I would like to ask Gustavo to reply to the first question. Gustavo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benoît, and thank you particularly to the Stockholm Forum and to the Challenges Forum for the opportunity of participating, which is a very timely and relevant discussion. And the trend presented in the session, and particularly kickstarted by Borja's presentation about the UN Security Council increasingly deploying special political missions, it's also an increasingly trend for the African Union, and the AU here will be the main focus of my remarks. And I believe there are many lessons we can take from how African organizations have approached these issues and how other regional organizations can take those lessons in their peace-building initiatives. Because while we often talk about the role of AMISOM, AU's most notorious and sole peace support operations, there are around 12 missions or liaison offices across Africa in places like Sudan, South Sudan, or Libya. Through the engagement in political dialogue, which often includes mediation, and in broader peace-building initiatives, these offices have been in reality AU's take on political missions. Certainly one can identify many challenges for the implementations of AU liaison officers' mandates, and these are often related to their very nature. The transitioning of an AU peace support operation to a liaison office, and at the same time, the deployment of other types of UN operations often creates a kind of an identity crisis for the AU. And the question that the AU asks itself is, what is our role and function in this post-peacekeeping environment? This was clear a few years back in countries like Mali or Central African Republic. Part of the reason relates to capacity and size. After a rehatching process, the UN is generally able to come to the ground with a steamrolling capacity and often overtakes the part that the AU was willing to play in supporting national peace-building initiatives. This clearly creates, amongst other challenges, a certain degree of competitiveness. For instance, if you have a few dozen of UN officers working with SSR in a particular country and possibly 1 or 2 AU SSR staff, there is clearly a capacity gap that challenges a broader role for the AU to fulfill. But despite these challenges, recent experiences also show that more targeted, specific, and focused engagements tend to be more effective for the African Union. These responses, when linked to a higher level degree of buy-in from African member states, tend also to show better results. This seems to be the case when the African Union becomes less concerned about programmatic responses and rather turns its attention to possibly its strongest comparative advantage, convening power and facilitation of processes. And for me, the recent examples of the AU in CAR is highly indicative of how regional organizations can showcase strength in national ownership processes. after its peace support operations was rehatted in 2014 by the UN, the AU really struggled for years to maintain its relevance in the country. But recently, despite having limited resources and numbers, it still had the political capital to bring actors together and effectively facilitate the signing of a peace agreement last year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. Borja, at this point, I would like you to come in with maybe the perspective from Colombia, of course, but also the OAS and how the UN and the OAS in particular have been engaging on that continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Benoît. Thank you, Gustavo. In many cases, when you analyze peace operations, the first thing you do is to analyze the top-down mandate that you receive from the Security Council or from the Assembly of the American Organization of American States. And you go through this top-down mandate and you analyze how they operate, how they arrive to the country, how they select the people, how they... But I think we will need to have a different reading of these peace operations. And for me, it's very interesting to try to understand how these peace operations develop legitimacy from below. And from here, and here there are a lot of learnings that we can get from different countries. How peace builders establish their position at the local level. Local peace builders, how they create trust, how they mediate among them, how they participate in the different peace dynamics, how they mediate. If we learn from that, from different countries, we can also learn how UN officials at the local level are doing that. And this process of connection, networking, talking, dialogue, I think is very important for the processes to be more legitimate, more transformative, and more able to contribute to the peace process, talk in capital letters.
Thank you, Borja. I think that's a key question of legitimacy and how at the very normative level with the Security Council, all the way down to the local level, that really needs to be a key element in how to engage national actors. So thank you for that. Roselyn, at this point, I would like to ask you to come in on that particular question, and in particular, of course, the viewpoint from DPPA and how the UN can support those regional initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benoît, and thank you so much to the Challenges Forum and to the Challenges Forum for the invitation, and of course the Stockholm Forum for these discussions. I think some of the points that have been made by Borja from his research are really, really useful, and we'll be following up clearly with him to see how we can do this in the broader work that we have of special political commissions. I think it's really important to have outsiders, academics, review some of the work that our special political commissions are doing, as we have seen in the case of Colombia. But I would be quite interested in seeing how this plays out in other places like Yemen, where we have special political commissions, or more difficult places like Syria, where we operate, and how we negotiate the legitimacy and acceptance by local communities. And I think Gustavo has made very good points on the comparative advantage of regional organizations. And as a former staffer of the African Union, I couldn't emphasize this much more in terms of the African Union recognizing where it has its comparative advantage and playing to that comparative advantage. The convening authority is important, but I think it's also the legitimacy. Because for us, as the United Nations, we believe in African leadership. We believe in the African continent taking the lead in solving their problems. And the African Union, the Economic Commission for West African States, ECOWAS, IGAD, all these regional and sub-regional organizations, East African Community and others, have a key role to play. They come with the legitimacy of that even if we wanted as much as we could at the UN, we're not comparable because they are in the community. The member states have signed up to a lot of regional or sub-regional agreements that we can build on. And so we see these organizations, whether it's CSTO, whether it's Shanghai Cooperation, that are working in the regions that are established by member states to address the issues of each of those member states as really key partners. Because on our own from the UN, from New York, or from even special political missions that we have, we cannot be able to do our work if we do not collaborate with these organizations, region organizations. And it really goes back to the heart of what we keep saying, national ownership. We cannot talk about national ownership without implementing that national ownership. And these regional organizations play that role of ensuring that that national ownership is there. We've seen the collaboration that we have, for instance, working with ECOWAS on any single issue in West Africa. Although we have fantastic chambers, special representative of the Secretary General chambers who works in Dakar very closely with ECOWAS and the member states, he would not be able to achieve what he's been able to do without ECOWAS, without the African Union. It's indispensable. We couldn't do what we have done in Somalia without the African Union. We couldn't do what we have done in Sudan for all these years without the African Union. There are other cases that are not always in the headlines. You look at the work that the office, the Liaison office for the African Union is doing in Liberia, working very closely with us and ECOWAS in ensuring that we have coordinated messages that go to the government, or Sierra Leone or Cote d'Ivoire. These are places in which we see the good offices of the African Union, the good offices of ECOWAS coming in very handy. Organization of American States, huge partner for the United Nations. It's complicated, as many of you who cover the region would understand, but we see our work together in Colombia, in Haiti, in other places as really indispensable. And I could speak about many other regions, which I wouldn't want to go into detail at this point, given the time limitations. But really the emphasis for us at the UN is that, we cannot do peace building. We cannot sustain peace without working with the local actors, without working with the regional organizations, without working with all the partners that are on the ground, that have the legitimacy. It does not matter how strong your mandate from the Security Council is. It does not matter how many pages the council gives you. If you do not have the legitimacy, the national ownership, your chances of success are very limited.
Thank you very much for that, Roselyn. Partnerships in support of national ownership, increasing legitimacy. Key words there. Sharon, I would like to see with you at this point whether we have some questions from our audience.
We do, Benoît. We have a couple of questions, and we'll take two for now, and you can see if we can continue with more before we move on. So the first question is for Gustavo, and it comes from Alia Abushanab from our partner, CCCPA. The question is, how do we push this conversation further, drawing on the soon-to-be operationalized AU Center for PCRD in Cairo? I mean, assuming it's how can better and more to the point, how can better cooperation between political missions and liaison officers on the ground be advanced while leveraging on comparative advantages of the AU, as you have set out? Should I take the second question now?
Let's maybe first go into answering this question, Sharon, and then we can go into a second. Gustavo, over to you, please.
Thanks very much, Alia, for this question. And I think it's a critical question. The AU post-conflict reconstruction and development policy was developed in 2006 and effectively has been AU's entry point to peace building. And until very recently, it hasn't been a policy framework that was widely understood internally or was widely implemented by the African Union. I think the point where we are now, with more and more experiences from the AU in terms of PCRD, but particularly the opportunity that having a dedicated center in Cairo that will be dealing with a post-conflict reconstruction and development, it's really key for the AU and how they interact with other actors. But I think there is a number of things that needs to be done. First, I think there is the need for the African Union to further reflect on what is the role of the center vis-a-vis the role of the African Union Commission in Addis Ababa, vis-a-vis the role of the AU liaison officers on the ground. I think there is still quite a lot of uncertainty to many actors of what the center was going to be doing in terms of its own facilitation, in terms of its own implementation of initiatives. And part comes with this kind of identity issue that I mentioned in the beginning. Is the AU expected through the center to be an implementer of programmatic activities on the ground, or the AU through its own legitimacy that was mentioned by Roselyn is going to facilitate process and convene responses on the ground? I think that is particularly important for the AU, and that we don't make the opportunity that we have with the new center in Cairo to potentially be a challenge and a space for uncoordinated actions by the AU itself. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gustavo, for that. Sharon, do we have time for a second question from our audience?
I hope so. Here's a question from Erin McKendalls, Wits University School of Governance in South Africa. She's also former UN DPPA and is a consultant across agencies. Her question is, so I'll give a little bit of her, she's situated her question in a little bit of a background, so I'll try to summarize as best as I can. Focusing on local actors and building their legitimacy is undoubtedly critical. But what about the reality that many structural causes of conflict involve the state? I worry if we swing the focus too far to the local without understanding the complex dynamics in play, we get into deeper waters. And her question is, what promising practices are there for international regional actors in building state-society relations effectively?
And this is a question for whom?
Well, I guess for the whole panel.
Okay, good. Borja, did you want to take this question?
Yeah, I can say something. I'm not a researcher. I'm more a practitioner. I lived 15 years in Colombia working for different actors, but I spent 12 years working for the UN, particularly the UNDP. And of these 12 years, I was almost 8 years working at the local level and supporting local institutions and local communities to try to resist the armed conflict, but also to interact among them in a more constructive way. And we created like a triangle between the UN, between the local institutions, the local communities, women organizations, and many others, and the UN, UNDP, and other international organizations. And we work together in order to promote a bottom-up process, cooperation among these actors in order to be more ready to resist the conflict and the violence, but also more ready to prepare the peace-building process once the peace agreement was reached. And in Colombia, the only way to understand peace-building in Colombia is, and trying to understand the role of the international, the only way to do that is how the international has been able to create the spaces where local communities and the local state and other state actors are encountering themselves, are constructing and are promoting collaborative agendas, are trying to find ways to resist the armed conflict, to transform it, to promote the local capacities of peace. My experience shows, and it's not my experience, it's Colombian experience shows that it's the best way for the internationals to support the peace process is not only negotiating and mediating at the highest level in Bogota or in New York, but supporting the constructive interactions among many actors to resist the conflict, but also find ways to transform it constructively.
Thank you for that, Borja. We have lots of questions coming in, but I'm afraid we need to move on to the guiding question number 2, which is on national ownership. So how can regional organizations, through political missions, strengthen the national ownership to address drivers of peace and conflict? And what is the role of the UN in this? And I would like Roselyn to start with this question. Thank you, Roselyn. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benoît, for that question. And, you know, national ownership obviously is one of the things that we emphasize at the UN as really important. But when we speak about national ownership, we are not just talking about states, we are also talking about people. And it goes back to the previous question that was asked you know, the state is really important, the government is very important, but so are the people involved. And we have seen from all peace processes or political processes that we have been engaged in, that any political agreement or peace agreement that you have that is just an elite bargain, an elite deal, is not sustainable. And so when we talk about national ownership, we're not just talking about the political parties, we're not just talking about the politicians, we're not talking about just only the armed groups. We're talking about inclusivity and ensuring that, that you have broad ownership of the peace building, of sustaining peace efforts. And this is really where the role of UN country teams working very closely with the UN political missions comes in very handy. A lot of our UN country teams have programs that are focusing on governance, are focusing on reaching out to women, youth, that are focusing on building institutions. And this is really the value that the UN brings in when you have a political mission. When you have a political mission like in Guinea-Bissau, that is an integrated peace building office that ensures that the UN country team works very closely with the political leadership, that the political objectives are key and important and central to the work that we are doing in Guinea-Bissau or Sierra Leone or any other country that we have an integrated peace building mission. So the whole goal of having a structure like that as a political mission is to ensure that we are able to ensure that it's, you know, you have an integrated approach to how you're looking at a situation. And then with that broad leadership that you have at the top, then we are able to engage with the regional organizations. And in this case, again, if I pick just Guinea-Bissau, it will then be the special representative of the Secretary General working very closely with ECOWAS, working very closely with the African Union on ensuring that the broader political objectives are met. So, I mean, this is a situation, this is how we see ourselves as a UN working on ensuring national ownership, where we work from the UN country team level, we work through the various UN agencies, funds, and programs towards one common political objective and integrate the work of the various regional organizations working in that context. And you'll see this whether you are looking at the work we are doing in Central Asia with our UN office in Ashgabat, or whether you're looking at Colombia, which Borja has spoken about, or whether you're looking at the difficult task of state building that we're doing in Somalia, where, again, you have an integrated political mission that is bringing together the work of the entire UN country team and working very closely with AMISOM, working very closely with the African Union, and working very closely with all the other actors that are there. So I, you know, for us, that's how we see it. We see, this integrated approach of getting us working together, but also ensuring that we are akin, or we're not forgetting the political objective, the broader political objective that our political missions have, and ensuring that we use the voice of the special representatives of the Secretary General to engage with the African Union, to engage with the OAS or any other regional organizations that is working at that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roselyn, for pointing that out, highlighting the role of the UNCT. A few days ago, actually, Stockholm Forum had a session on the new peacebuilding actors. And one of the recommendations there was, because peacebuilding is so much part of the broader development agenda, that the role of the UNCT and the resident coordinator is so crucial in bringing everyone on board. So thank you for that, Roselyn. Gustavo, did you want to come in on this question, please, at this point?
Yes, thank you very much, Benoît. And I think that is a critical question, because while national ownership is in principle widely agreed and accepted by all, in reality it's a bit more challenging, because defining who is the local and how that interaction is built is of extreme importance. In this sense, I wanted to narrow down a bit the role of political missions and how they can help building the capacity of national actors, particularly through the idea of leaving a legacy behind after they leave. And here I wanted to go back to some of these cases that were mentioned by Roselyn that are not always in the headlines. Because for me, one of the most interesting recent cases of the African Union political offices supporting national ownership is the case of the Gambia, a very small presence for the AU. And interestingly enough, the Gambia is a country that technically doesn't even have its own AU liaison office. So after the largely successful regional conflict prevention enterprise in the country in late 2016, the AU engaged with the national government in identifying a few key response areas. This did not lead to the creation of a costly and high on overheads political mission. Instead, the AU created a small technical team and sent 10 officers to be co-deployed within the Gambian government to mentor and assist with the development of strategies related to human rights, rule of law, and transitional justice. And for me, these examples are part of the future of some of the regional engagements in peacebuilding environments, because they show that in order to be effective, actors need to have the modesty of acknowledging not being able to do everything. And dealing with modesty here is not a metaphysical exercise. It is rather an opportunity to respond to the limitations that individual actors have in very crowded environments. Therefore, examples like the AU in the Gambia really show that by engaging in a process of assessing comparative advantages may actually lead to organizations to start doing less in the process of supporting national actors. And in doing less, they may well become more effective. It could enable actors to potentially work in a less competitive nature and to collaborate more with other actors on the ground, being them the government, local civil society, UN missions, country teams, and other bilateral partners. And maybe in doing less, they can identify better and more reasonable parameters of success and manage and adjust its action to the realities and challenges encountered on the ground.
Thank you, Gustavo, for that. I think that's a crucial point. Parameters of success. I think that's in line with some of the questions that were submitted actually by the registrants. Thank you for that. Borja, did you want to quickly come in as well on this question?
Yes, thank you. I'm using also my personal experience as a UN professional. In many occasions, I spent several years in a very local region, supporting local actors, local institutions, and also international who were living there to coordinate themselves. And in many occasions, we created platforms, we created agendas, we created programs, we managed to coordinate the different actors in a common agenda for peace and development, etc. And that has happened in different regions in Colombia with different interactions between the locals and the internationals and the local state. and the national state in some cases also. In many occasions, during these years, in the middle of the armed conflict, we got some visits from the UN political people. And they, in a very, not very nice way, they render us irrelevant. But once they started to participate in the peace process a few years ago, they built all their strategy using the capacities that the local actors, together with internationals and local institutions, created. They built their response acknowledging that. And now the UN system, the UN political mission is very relevant, it's very trusted, because they built on the work the UN system did before. And this is fundamental. There is not a difference between the political aspect and the development aspect. It's something that needs to be interlinked, connected, create coherence. It's something that relates to the effectiveness of the development agenda, but also to the capacity of these agendas to develop institution, trust, good communication, to develop infrastructures for peace that will be useful later when a peace process is on place. And it will be useful to support the local capacities and the local ownerships to lead this longer-term peace process.
Thank you, Borja. I think that's a key element, that there's a growing acknowledgement that all partners need to work towards a common political goal. Sharon, at this point, do we have some questions from the audience relevant to this question?
I do. Yes. This is from Per Biel Chanda from Folke Bernadotte Academy. And it's a question for both Roselyn and Gustavo. What are some of the bottlenecks in unlocking the potential of AU political and liaison officers to take a bigger and more independent role in mediating conflict on the continent?
Thank you. Very relevant question. Roselyn, did you want to take that one first?
Sure, and I'm sure Gustavo is more in a better position to speak about the criticism, which I can't, of my former employer. So I will not go into that. I'll just speak maybe more about the broader constraints that we all face when we are working on mediation. There are constraints that we face as the UN, and I think they're the similar constraints that to some extent the African Union would obviously be able to face when dealing with mediation. I mean, of course, sovereignty is a big issue, and getting member states to accept that there is an issue, there is a problem. Every member state will tell you, we absolutely have no problem. We are peaceful people. We're absolutely okay. We don't need any mediation support. And so that is a challenge that you will have both as a UN or the African Union or any other entity. It becomes much less acute for organizations such as the African Union or the sub-region organizations, because they are closer to the region and that. But sovereignty is a big issue. Geopolitical interest, it's much easier to get into a mediation process where you are dealing with countries where the geopolitical interests are not huge. Anytime you have a situation in which the big five are involved, then it becomes really complicated. And the big five could be the big five in the African continent, or they could be the big five in the global context. And I don't need to name countries, you would be able to figure out what I'm referring to. So whenever you have situations like that, it will of course complicates your ability to be able to work on mediation. And maybe lastly, just to say that, it's all about, again, when we talk about national ownership, it goes back to the political will of the actors. I mean, if the actors, whether they are belligerent armed groups, are not willing to negotiate peace, are not willing to come onto the table, and there are no carrots and sticks, incentives and other measures that can get them onto the table, it becomes extremely difficult, especially in this context, geopolitical context, in which you're having more regionalized, more internationalized conflicts. It becomes a very, very tricky context. But of course, Gustavo can go into the other things that I cannot be able to go into as an international civil servant. Thank you.
Gustavo, the floor is yours. Thank you, Roselyn.
Thank you very much for this question. And I think while on one side, mediation has been one of the most active places in which the African Union has engaged with, we've also seen many challenges structurally of how and where mediation sits within the African Union. Because one of the challenges is that often we've seen mediation a bit in an ad hoc manner within the AU. And to what we said, sometimes it feels that mediation is always looking for a home. It's always looking for a space and a dedicated capacity within the AU that can actually support it more effective responses. Because sometimes we see directly or indirectly, even outside of a scope of a formal mediation process, the panel of the wise, the different envoys, the AU liaison offices, the different special representative of the chairperson, all somehow engaging on mediation processes or peacemaking at large. And I think that is one of the things that we need to clarify. We need to provide more clear mandates for the AU that effectively talks about the relevance of the African Union. But the other issue, and I think Roselyn mentions really well, is the issue about political buy-in. Because we need, on the one hand, to get the political buy-in from African member states to really empower its own mediators and to ensure that they are being effective in providing a continuous support to peace process in the continent. But also at the same time that these African member states are also able to gather the buy-in from the rest of the international community, and particularly from the UN Security Council. We've seen many of these challenges of the AU trying to become more relevant and trying to become more visible in countries like Libya, and really facing a stumbling block from the rest of the international community. And I think one of the ways in which you can do that, and particularly by empowering AU liaison offices, is empowering the capacity and the linkages between the AU liaison offices and the AU Commission in Addis Ababa, particularly through the establishment of a strong mediation support units. We've seen in the last couple of years, at least the creation of the framework and the structure and the staffing of the AU mediation support units in Addis Ababa, but ensuring that it's effectively able to engage with actors on the ground to provide the capacity and interact with other mediation support structures around the globe that effectively provide the support and expertise that African mediators require and necessitate on the ground. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gustavo. I think that's a crucial point you made there, that clear roles and responsibilities help going a long way in rendering efforts more effective and coordinated. So thank you for that. Sharon, I'm afraid we no longer have time for other questions from the audience, so I will go to the closing session, which is basically a 1-minute intervention by our panelists on the following. So we would like to get your viewpoints on pragmatic next steps in how to ensure strategic partnerships and coherence between the UN and regional organizations. In a 1-minute summary, how do you see this taken forward in very pragmatic way? Roselyn, did you want to go first on that one?
Sure, thank you very much. I think, Bohia talked about at the beginning, gave us the IKEA example of talk, which I think is always underestimated. We are always seen as a talk shop at the United Nations. But I'm glad that Bohia is confirming that actually that's not a very bad thing after all. So I think I would go with that. I would go with the importance of ensuring that we continue our strategic engagement with all the regional organizations. And here I'm not picking from any one particular particular region, because as the United Nations, we work across the globe. And so it's really important to continue investing in the high-level political dialogues, for instance, that the Secretary General has with all the heads of regional organizations. Too bad that COVID has not allowed us to be able to convene that this year, but that engagement is absolutely important because it provides us with the anticipatory relations. It helps us create those relationships that you can then plug into when you have a crisis. Being able to call in the head of CSTO when there is a problem in the area that CSTO covers, or being able to call the head of Shanghai Cooperation or ASEAN, because you have established those very good relations. And I think one of the things that we as the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs have been trying to do is increase the number of liaison presences that we have in places where we have regional organizations. We've just opened up with the approval of the General Assembly, a small liaison office with the League of Arab States. We already have one in Addis Ababa with a liaison to the African Union. We have one that liaises with ECOWAS. We have a small two-person team liaising with ASEAN. So if we can continue investing in talking and engaging and building these partnerships, I think it will be critical in our work on peace building, on sustaining peace, on prevention and mediation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Roselyn. Gustavo, before I give you the floor, I would like to throw in a quick poll, if we can have it now. So, can data management help political missions in improving strategic analysis and operational coherence across national, regional, and international peacebuilding efforts? Please submit your answers. So an overwhelming yes, 97% of our participants indicate that data management can help in improving the overall strategic analysis and operational coherence. With that, Gustavo, I would like to hand over the floor to you in 1 minute, briefly.
Thanks, Benoît, and I'll try to be very brief. Because there's been much emphasis on the role of regional organizations and particularly the strategic partnership between the AU and the UN. At the ISS, we've been working very closely with the issue. We have a partnership with the AU and also with the International Peace Institute. So I wanted to briefly talk about 3 views and recommendations that somehow comes from this work we've been doing. First, I think it's important to strengthen AU's own views around peace building and increase internal coherence amongst its own actors. I think that is one particular point. Second, while much of the attention of the relationship between the AU and the UN has somehow focused on peacekeeping operations, we do need to have a stronger engagement between the UN peacebuilding architecture and the AU post-conflict reconstruction and development actors, including its funding components, being the Peacebuilding Fund or the revitalized AU Peace Fund. Both organizations sometimes have struggled to showcase their relevance in peacebuilding processes. And I strongly believe that by working together, both can be strengthened in this process. And finally, often some of these UN peacebuilding and AU post-conflict reconstruction and development discussions feel somehow constrained to places like New York and Addis Ababa. And I do think the 2 organizations can work together to really help to socialize and scale down these discussions more closely to the field, to the liaison offices, and particularly ensuring that they can work better together in the socialization of practice and common practice between themselves. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gustavo. Borja, quickly to you, please. I'm trying to keep track of time. Thank you.
I'm going with the same ideas Roselyn expressed, that we need to give value to the talking, but the other part of talking is listening, which is also very important. And while you talk and listen, you also can include by design, as I said in my presentation. And this process, this creation, it will lead into co-creation, co-design, construction of knowledge, and this can lead into co-design of solution for complex problems. The only way to solve complex problems as the one we're facing in conflict settings is to try to look the problems from different perspectives and try to include different voices and different possible solutions, create spaces for deliberation, and also try to find a concrete complex solution for these complex problems. I miss in Colombia the possibility of organizing a more direct conversation between the OAS and the UN political missions, because they both have been in Colombia several years. They both have a lot of experiences, concrete experiences, and through this talking and listening, they can come up with good ideas and with good proposals that may inspire other countries.
Thank you very much, Borja, for that. This brings us to the end of this webinar. Before handing over the floor to Sharon for some closing remarks, I would like to thank you, panelists, personally, for your great interventions, and of course you, audience, for great questions. We will be providing a 2-page policy paper that we will be sharing through the social media channels. And the webinar will also be made available on the YouTube channel. So with that, thank you very much once again. And Sharon, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Benoît. I'd like to echo what you said and congratulate our panelists for very enriching discussions, and also to our very engaged participants who come from all over the globe. The discussion today will certainly help the Challenges Forum and our partners to reflect on our role, and will not least certainly inform our preparations for our upcoming annual forum, which will take place later in the year, and likely a virtual one as well. We would very much like you to take a minute or two to respond to our survey at the end of this session. I'll just close really to say that our goal is to help shape the debate, and we and all of you have made substantial contributions to that objective today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.